There's a moment we all have that we recognize, even if we don't have language for it immediately. I call it the summer camp experience, and it's still alive and well in us as adults. You go to a great workshop, you have a powerful conversation, you do a breath session or a cold plunge, a ceremony, or some intense physical practice, and it's euphoric. You feel absolutely different after, clearer, more open, more confident, more alive in your body, and you walk out thinking, this is it. This is the shift. And then a few days later, or a week later, maybe even the next morning when you're back in your familiar territory and environment, you encounter the same reactions, same tension, same looping debates, same patterns showing up, almost like right on schedule. And you think, what happened? That's not personal failure. It's a misunderstanding of how change actually happens in the nervous system. Now, before we go any further, this is another place where knowing how your system is wired really matters, because different nervous systems get a very different return on the same experiences. If you haven't taken the Somatic Skins Quiz yet, it's worth doing early because it'll show you how you tend to regulate, adapt, or respond under pressure. And that context will make the rest of this video land more personally for you. Here's the distinction in the summer camp experience that no one makes clearly enough. A vibe shift is a state change, but neural change is a structural change. And I'm going to say that again. A vibe shift is a state change. Neural change is a structural change. States are easy to access. They're responsive. They're fluid. They happen when stimulus is high enough or it's novel enough. Music, intensity, group energy, altered breathing, adrenaline, catharsis, all of that can move the system temporarily. But structures don't change just because a state felt meaningful. Your nervous system is conservative. It keeps what works and it releases what doesn't, only after repeated evidence that a new pattern is safer, more efficient, or more reliable than the old one. So one powerful experience might show your system what's possible, but it doesn't convince it to reorganize. That reorganization takes discipline. And discipline doesn't mean punishment or grit your teeth, not that kind of discipline. It means repetition under stable conditions, ideally in a new environment of support. Somatic discipline is the difference between visiting a new state and building a new default. Most people are chasing experiences that give them that temporary sense of alignment. It's like an insight hit, not realizing that alignment disappears because the underlying architecture hasn't been trained to sustain it. And so the system does exactly what it's designed to do. Eventually, it returns back to baseline. And here's the subtle trap. Because the experience felt real, most people will assume that loss of that experience meant something went wrong. They'll think that they lost motivation, or they fell off track, or they weren't committed enough, or the modality doesn't work. In reality, nothing integrated. Neural pathways change through exposure plus repetition plus recovery. They change when the body is asked to organize itself slightly differently, consistently enough that the old pattern stops being the most efficient option. That's why intensity alone doesn't work, because intensity will spike states. Discipline shapes structure. This will show up very differently depending on your skin, and honestly, your emotional reaction or mental judgment of everything I just shared will also show up differently depending on your skin. Some systems are very good at generating states. They feel big shifts quickly. They open fast. They connect deeply in moments. But without discipline, that moment never consolidates. The system keeps returning back to familiar regulation strategies because they've been rehearsed thousands of times. Other systems resist states entirely. They're skeptical of anything that feels transient or emotional. But when they finally experience a shift, they often overestimate its permanence because it felt so different from their baseline. Without ongoing training, though, that shift becomes an exception, not a new rule. Then there are systems that understand all of this cognitively. You know discipline matters, you know repetition matters, but the discipline you apply lives at the level of ideas, neck up, not in the body. And so insights will accumulate, but behavior doesn't reorganize under pressure. Somatic discipline is where this changes. It's the practice of asking your nervous system to meet the same demand differently, over and over again, until the difference becomes the new automatic. It's training posture, breath, attention, and timing so that when stress appears, you don't have to remember what to do. You don't have to consult a notebook or try to rehearse. Your body will already know. This is why people who've trained in martial arts, dance, or certain forms of physical craft often have a different relationship to pressure. They don't rise to the occasion through willpower. They fall back on structure that's been laid down patiently, sometimes boringly, over time. Permanent change isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It shows up when the situation that normally would pull you off center just simply doesn't. When the old reaction never fires because there's now a more efficient pathway available. That's neural change. This is where discipline stops being about motivation and it starts being about design. You don't need to push yourself harder. You need to give your system the right inputs in the right order, frequently enough that it trusts them. If you're trying to understand why certain changes never stick for you, the first useful question isn't, what experience do I need next? It's, what does my system already know how to do under pressure? Again, that's the exact question that the Skins Quiz linked below will help clarify. It'll show you your default strategy so that you can stop training randomly. If you want to go beyond understanding into real repatterning, that's exactly the work that we do inside the Prestige. It's an applied somatics academy built around live environments, disciplined practice, and personalized coaching, where change is measured by what holds when life applies force, not just by how good something feels in the moment. Vibe shifts are invitations, like an appetizer into what's possible for you, but discipline is what will turn that into architecture. If you want permanent change, train the system that actually decides what you do when it matters. Thank you so much for making it this far and hanging out with me for a bit. If you enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe. It helps the channel out and it inspires us to create more for you. Until next time.